Welcome to another lesson from Soflex Math. We're going to continue our multiplying decimals unit, and this time we're going to work with where we have decimals times decimals. In our previous lesson we had some whole numbers in there. Now it's just strictly a decimal times a decimal. The math, the multiplying, is going to be very simple, and more importantly is where you're going to place your decimal. Because if you multiply these correctly but you put your decimal in the wrong spot, that's just as wrong as multiplying wrong. So let's take a look at our first one. So we have 0 and 6/10 times 0 and 4/10. Okay, so the easy part about it is the multiplying. Let's just worry about that. 6 times 4 is 24. So when we come over here, let's go ahead and just write our answer of 24. All right, so 24 doesn't make sense. Okay, so let's take a look. This time, remember we said we count to the right of the decimal. So we have one spot at the top and one spot at the bottom. So decimal and 6, there's one spot. Decimal 4, there's a second spot, which means, remember we said in our previous lesson, our answer needs to match that. So now I have 1, 2, 1, 2. So our answer, 0 and 6/10 times 0 and 4/10 is 0 and 24/100ths. So once again, look at how our answer was smaller, or it's less than what we started with. Okay, here's what I was trying to say earlier. You might have 24. You did the multiplying right, but if you didn't count right and you put your decimal like this, 2 and 4/10 is incredibly different than 0 and 24/100ths. So that's equally wrong. So we just don't want to just focus on multiplying. This is where the decimal goes, is the main focus of this lesson. So let's take a look at our second one. So now we have 3 decimal spots to the right. So we have 0 and 7/100ths times 0 and 5/10. So let's go ahead and do the easy math. 7 times 5 is 35. All right, and now we have 1, 2, 3 spots to the right. So I'm going to put my decimal over here. We only have 2 numbers. What do you think we have to put here? Well, this is called a placeholder. So we're going to put our 0 in here because we need to have 3 spots to the right of the decimal. Now I need 3 spots. So we just add an extra 0 in there so that our answer to 0 and 7/100ths times 0 and 5/10 is 0 and 35,000ths. So notice how we have the 3 decimal places now. One other thing, just going back to our previous place value lesson of reading and writing numbers, notice how I'm reading these correctly. It never hurts to keep practicing that throughout our lessons. So if you're saying 0.07 times 0.5, I'd like you to try to work on reading the numbers correctly. So 0 and 7/100ths times 0 and 5/10, and then your answer is not 0.035, but rather 0 and 35,000ths. So we really want to work on reading the numbers as well as we work through these lessons. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. Okay, this one we have 0 and 31/100ths times 0 and 7/10. So we're going to go through our normal multiply. We just want to get all the numbers down first, and then we'll worry about our decimals. So 7 times 1, okay, so let's think about that. 7. 7 times 3 is 21. Okay, we don't have to do 0 times anything is 0, so we're kind of finished with this problem. All right, and now I have 1, 2, 3 spots to the right of my decimal. So we're going to put our decimal there, and we're going to have 1, 2, 3 spots to the right of our decimal. So once again, before I tell you, try to read this number correctly. So do not read it as 0.217. It should be 0 and 217,000ths. So look, we just read the number like you see it. Pretend there was nothing there, 217. And then we just put our label on. This is the 7 ends in the thousandths place value. Remember, tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. Okay, one more, and then we'll let you do some practice on your own. All right, so we have 0 and 35/100ths times 0 and 4/10. Okay, so looking again, 4 times 5 is 20. Carry the 2. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. Now, this one's kind of good because it ends in a 0. We still have to keep that 0 as a placeholder right now for when we're counting our decimal places. So, in this case, we have 1, 2, 3 spots to the right. So we're going to have to put our decimal down so that we have 1, 2, 3 spots to the right. So, a lot of times when we were rounding and things like that, we could cross out that last 0. And once we write our answer, we could still cross out our 0 now. But when we're just doing the multiplication part as far as counting where the decimal should go, we have to count that 0. Because otherwise, if we didn't, we'd be counting 3 from here, and that changes the number completely. So let's see how you could read this number one of two ways. You could read it as 0 and 140 thousandths. Or after you've placed your decimal, if you cross that 0 out, because it's the same thing, you could just read this as 0 and 14 hundredths. So either way would be a correct way to read that answer. But we have to make sure we keep our 0 in here until we put our decimal place down. So when we count off our 3 decimal points, then if you want to cross it out, kind of to simplify it, that is perfectly okay. All right. So when you practice on your own, just remember to count the decimal places. And if you have any questions, please ask those in the comments. And we're going to have one more whole number in a decimal times a whole number in a decimal for our last lesson. Once again, it's really more of the same. So if you've been doing good on lesson 1 and 2, lesson 3 should be no problem, because all we're going to be doing is just moving the decimal in different places. But it's still working on multiplying and all that the same way. All right, we'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks for watching Soflex Math.